gonna go over glazing your box. So the first thing you need to do is make sure you have paper down. Then you need to grab your glazes and some different size brushes. If you're doing large areas, use a big brush. Small areas, use a little brush. The glazes that I chose were very different from each other. I chose a green glaze and a purple glaze. And I'm also gonna do a yellow glaze on some highlighted areas. If you want something that has a lot of texture, that shows texture well, just look at the side of the bottle and see if it changes color wherever there's texture. A lot of times they'll show that. Keep in mind that glaze is a chemical mixture that goes over your box. Right now, this looks like it is a reddish brown, but realize that when it goes in the kiln, the chemicals will melt, they will react to the high temperature and change color, and the silica in the glaze will turn to glass. That glass will melt at the high heat, and then as it cools, it will solidify and turn into that nice glassy coating that you expect. So just remember that what it's gonna turn out like will look like on the side of the bottle, not on the actual color of the glaze at this point. And as you're glazing, remember you don't wanna glaze anything that's gonna contact the kiln because that will fuse onto the kiln. The glaze will melt, turn to glass, and then as it cools, it will harden and stick to the kiln, and it will stick your box to the bottom of the kiln. So make sure you don't do that. Also think about your lid. I'm clearing off this space so that I can set that on the kiln like so. That way this part won't fuse to the kiln when I'm setting it on here. Additionally, think about how your lid is going to function. If you didn't give much space for your lid to fit, you want to consider that as you're glazing, because the glaze will add a thickness to your box, and maybe your lid won't fit later on. So really think about how the glaze is going to change your box. I would say try and glaze everything. You can even glaze down here as long as it's not touching the kiln. Remember, mine is just going to touch on these little feet, so you can glaze under here as well. I just haven't done that yet. I would try and glaze the inside of your box if that's possible. It does look much better if you glaze the inside. I'm gonna start out by glazing some highlighted areas on my lid. I think my lid, I'm gonna have some yellow. So here's a yellow glaze called oatmeal. I'll just open that up. Most important thing to think about when you're glazing is that you glaze using 3 to 4 coats. If you do less than that, it likely won't turn out exactly as the bottle shows. If you do more than that, what will happen is the glaze will sit on your box very thick, and as it melts in the kiln, there'll be so much on there that it will start to flow off of the side of your box onto the kiln, and that will create, as it cools, it will solidify and it will basically seal your box to the kiln shelf, and then we won't be able to get it out without breaking that off, because remember, it turns to glass in the kiln. So 3 to 4 coats. Do not just cake it on there. You want to be really specific about it. If I was doing it, I would do 1 coat, let that dry, and then come back, do a 2nd coat, and be very methodical about it. Just really paying close attention to how you're applying it. And when you're applying it, glaze is a little bit different than paint. Glaze, you got to be really careful that you don't take a coat off. So when I put glaze on, I just try and lay it on there. So just lay it 1 stroke down, and then I lay the next one right next to that. If you brush it like this, if you just do repeated brush strokes, a lot of times what will happen is the glaze will be taken right back off. So you want to be very careful to just lay 1 coat on, let that dry, and then add your 2nd coat once that is on. So you can see I'm just trying to lay it on there, trying not to overlap too much because I want to be very thoughtful in how I apply the glaze. That would be 1 coat on my little feature here. My next step is to quickly let it dry. Right now the glaze is getting sucked up into this porous clay box. So I'm ready to do my 2nd coat because I can see that it's dry. And And I'm just very carefully trying to lay my second coat on there. And this is such a small feature that I don't need to do very much with it. I don't need a ton of glaze. Then I would let that dry, and you'll be able to tell when it's dry. And maybe I do the handle while that's drying, and then I would do a third coat. And then if it still doesn't look quite the way I think it should, then I might do a fourth coat. If you're unsure, please ask. The worst thing that can happen is that you put way too much glaze on. So shoot for 3 to 4 coats. When you're done, please wash out your brushes in the sink and just put them back in the cups over there, and make sure you tighten your glazes back on the caps and put them back where they're supposed to go on the shelf.